Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul, worship His holy name. Sing like never before, oh my soul.
Who are of the age in their 20s. You know, I hear a lot of parents who talk about their children who are in their 20s, and some of them grieve because they have left the church, they don't attend worship, or that they simply probably do not keep the faith that they once did as a child. Whenever we talk about ministry, we need to go back to a very basic question, and that is, what is the need? Let me give you a quote from two brothers. Their father is a very familiar pastor. If I was to tell you who the pastor is in Houston, you would know who the pastor is. This is what they say of these two brothers. The truth is, we both come back from the brink of spiritual death. Really. Only a short time ago, we were so done with this whole Christian thing. Whatever we looked like on the outside, inside, we were desperate for something more. Nothing in church satisfied the inner hunger gnawing at us. Being Christian seemed to be only going through some of the emotions, following rules or keeping up appearances. So we tried something else. We lived as if God didn't exist. That worked for a while, and then it eventually stopped working. Actually, we ended up feeling even more desperate and unfulfilled than before. Josh, today we're talking ages of 18-year-olds to 30-year-olds. And as a generation who grew up quite differently than many of you previous generations. For example, this generation of 18 to 30-year-olds, think about it. They grew up with tablets, mobile devices, smartphones, apps, software, the desire to be connected 24/7, and it's not real unless you share it on Facebook or Twitter. Maybe that puts some light into it. And the largest university in the world is not Texas in name. What is it? The University of Phoenix. Long-distance learning. If I would ask for hands of how many of you have done long-distance learning, perhaps not too many, maybe over the age of 30, have done long-distance learning. So, Josh, maybe you can bring some perspective. Thanks for
Glad to do. One of the trends that we find today is that it's very common for young adults from the age range of 16 to 26 to experience what we deem a crisis of the faith. And it's in this time that they really begin to question their spiritual beliefs. Many become frustrated with faith at this age, and by the time they pass this age range, 2/3 will have left the church. The beliefs that used to be accepted as fact simply because our parents believed in them and passed on their beliefs to us are now being heavily questioned by the younger generation. And it's really no wonder when you consider the current state of things. Our schools teach evolution as a definite fact. We're taught from a very young age that everything can be explained with science and that anyone with a differing opinion can and should be labeled as crazy or stupid. The members of my generation are bred to view faith as a joke. And in an age where there are so many stimuli grabbing for our attention simultaneously, it takes more than it used to for the church to reach the younger crowd.
As I was talking with my kids, one boy is 29, my other son is 32, and our daughter is 21. And she made an interesting comment. She said, when I need some wisdom, she might go to mom and dad, but probably the first person she goes to is a peer. And this is very constant in terms of those who are in their 20s. The first person that they will go to will be there in the 20s, their peer. So we're talking about hand-me-down faith. In other words, hand-me-down faith does not work. It may work for a while that we can hand-me-down faith from our moms or dads or a favorite youth director, but eventually hand-me-down faith may not work so well when we have pressures and problems of life crumble. It may...
In preparation for this message, Dale referred me to a study by a man named David Kinnaman. And in a particular study, Kinnaman identifies 3 areas where 20-somethings are trying to get a hold on life. The first is in relationships. Earlier I mentioned the skepticism with which we've been taught to view faith in this generation. And the skepticism is due in part to a disconnect that we feel from our parents when it comes to faith. The difficulty there is that in our desire to break off and form our own independent identities, we encounter a time where what we believe is just as subject to questioning as the other things that we've taught over the years. And this time of vulnerability is one where we also form new and lasting relationships outside the home. So, those that find a good church home that speaks to their needs and questions are far less likely to leave the faith for good. The second area where those my age find trouble is in their jobs. We face the question of how faith actually relates to what we do. Is it important to place faith first? Do you actually go so far as to look for a job where you can place God first? Does God even care what you do as a vocation? These are difficult questions to answer without any kind of solid foundation. And these struggles that we face are made all the more difficult, really, because of the third issue, which is my generation desires information, but we often lack the wisdom to apply it properly. We've grown up in an age where information is as easily accessed as walking over to a small screen in your room and typing a question into Google. But the trouble there is that with such a simplified way of gaining so much knowledge, we don't really have to go through the actual in-depth thinking to apply it wisely. In the past, becoming introduced to a new idea meant first reading the basic idea as outlined in a philosopher's text or a scientist's text, then reading their argument and understanding their logic. But now all I have to do to begin to understand particle physics is go to Wikipedia and look for an article on particle physics. And it'll help for a little bit, but it's not going to benefit me in the long run. And people often view the church in the same light. They think they can go to church, and if they get the idea right off the bat, the church must be worthwhile. If not, then they can move on to the next idea. Without the wisdom to apply what we learn, we hopelessly fall in our struggles. Without the wisdom that God provides through the church, we stumble and we lose an entire generation to follow.
Let's talk about first-hand faith. It's not something that you borrow from someone. Can we pass on our faith as parents to our son, to our daughter, but eventually it has to be our own. In other words, it has to be our own mind and heart in terms of faith. And as our young people are looking, first of all, to their peers for these basic questions of life, we need to be around to be able to give them a safe place. Let me give you an example. A guy from Georgia, he says, looking back on his teenage years, he said, I had a strong case of what I call piggyback religion, meaning I confused being in a close relationship with my parents, who had a close relationship with God, with actually being close to myself. So Josh and I are going to talk about 5 issues that kind of revolve around all of this in terms of the 20-something. The first one is emptiness. You must be emptied out of that which you are full, so that you may be filled with that which you are empty, by Augustine.
Like Dale said, one of the primary problems that we face in this age is emptiness. It's not uncommon for men and women at this stage in life to admit that they feel a certain emptiness inside. But as sad as this is, we have to remember that God can take our darkest moments and turn them into opportunities for Him to perform wonders. You'll recall last week we looked at the Exodus story where Moses first encounters God in the desert, and God tells Moses to go to Pharaoh. And when he does that, he specifically says that Pharaoh will not listen, that there will be further troubles in Egypt, but that there is still no need to fear because this is simply a chance for God to work His wonders in the world. We have to remember to view these moments of emptiness as the gifts that they really are. They are true moments for divine intervention in the lives of hurting people. I'd actually like to provide an example of this from my own life. Several years ago, we had just moved to Texas, and I was fighting hard against my parents because of it. I resented them for picking me up and moving me somewhere that I didn't want to go, away from my friends, away from my family, away from a place that I had grown to love. And as I fought, I realized that it was because I felt empty again. I had filled my life with people, stuff, so that I didn't have to face the fact that I was a teenager without much to offer. And soon we began to look for a new church home, and I became involved in the worship ministry there. It helped me to see clearly for the first time in quite a while that God had filled me, that God had created me with a void that only He was supposed to fill, and the things that I was looking for didn't matter. Becoming involved in a new church that was willing to meet me at that point in my life was what helped me to grow closer to my family again and closer to God.
When I talked to my daughter, she spoke about this emptiness. And perhaps part of this emptiness in this generation is related to the very intentional delay of marriage. For example, in 1960, there were 5 developmental tasks completed by the age of 30. For example, you left home, you finished college or school of some sort, financially you were on your own, and you got married and you had a child. All before the age of 30. 77% of women were able to complete that before age 30, and men were quite right behind that. That was the norm in 1960.
But that's no longer the case. It's now far different. The norm used to be. And more often than not, these tasks that Dale mentioned are delayed now, and without a marriage relationship in which people can express and share their feelings, young adults often find it difficult to express these thoughts and emotions. We find that our inmost desire is to know God, or at least know more about Him. And yet, your peers that are in the same place spiritually are also lost and uncertain of where to go. So, when your network of people has no better answers than you do.
Today in the gospel, we have a feeding of the 5,000. Actually, it probably would be more like 10,000 or 15,000. Enough people to fill an arena. And there are 2 miracles here. To stretch 5 loaves and 2 bread to feed 15,000 or 10,000 people, that they were fed. They were completely fulfilled. And yet the other miracle is that there are some leftovers. So indeed, it was an extravagant kind of grace. And we're saying that to the 20s. Come and be fed. No matter who you are, grace is extravagant. There are leftovers. If you have a faith background, or if you are new to the faith, come and be welcomed as a friend and cared for as God's special gift. This is a place to ask the deep questions of life.
Today, to young people, church is often portrayed as anti-science, overly strict, and intolerant. In a society where so much is founded on scientific fact, there's a deep need to find a place where doubts can be expressed and where faith can actually be wrestled with on a logical level. You recall the name Israel literally translates as wrestles with God. And I think it's no coincidence that God's chosen people, the Israelites, are those that will wrestle with Him and come out stronger in faith after having done so. Gone are the days where faith simply means blindly accepting what has been told. I was in a debate with a group of Mormon missionaries recently, and their answer to the logical arguments is simply, well, it's just a matter of faith. That's not what faith is about. My answer then was this. Faith is not about being given this much and asked to believe this. Matter of fact, faith is quite often being given a ton of facts and then simply being asked to draw the logical conclusion. Getting this and being asked to believe this. Faith and mustard seed. Our job as a church is to provide the safe place to ask the questions that we face along the way to believing that last step.
And along with the second issue was basically doubt, dealing with doubt. Because as you're growing in from the 18-year-olds to the 20-year-olds, suddenly all of those, the seasons of life beginning to ask the questions and dealing with the doubts that you're wondering about your faith.
Scripture tells us in Romans 12, verse 2, do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. I think every generation struggles with this transformation, with being changed by our faith. It's all too common that we hear of someone who's been hurt by or excluded from the church when they needed God the most. In fact, one of my coworkers recently told me that he said, I stopped going to church for a while because I was in college. I was working full-time, and I was working 7 days a week to try to support myself, and the church that I was going to decided that was reason to blacklist me. So when this is the mental image that people get from the church, is it our job to be the light in the community that serves as a constant reminder of what church is supposed to be? This can be the place where people find the answer when they ask the question of what was meant to fill that void in their lives. But they won't look for it until they see that someone else has it. One of the most powerful ways that we see transformation taking hold in people's lives is when they're given the opportunity to serve. I mentioned earlier that my service in the worship ministry was actually what got me back into a right relationship with God. And here we offer many ways to serve the local community through outreach events, even stuff like setting up the altar on Sunday mornings, playing in the band, setting up and taking down equipment, whatever it may be. But we also affect the global community through mission trips like those we take with Gustavina and Peru. Trips like these are actually highly appealing to this generation. There are estimates that say that the money spent on mission trips is upwards of $2.4 billion.
One person, listen to Nadia from Beaumont, Texas. She says this about our mission trips. God has shown me the need for helping others as part of growing our faith. If I'm still so focused on me and my wants and desires of being a Christian for 5 years, I may not be following Him. As I mature in my walk with Christ, He switches my desires in my heart with a desire in here, and the first thing that happens is that God gives me a genuine love for others, because God's here is for others to come to know Him. Well, there are two spiritual practices in terms of any generation, in terms of how is it that we can understand God more fully. The first one is to be still. The second one is to let God guide. So Josh, talk about to be still.
My generation is in constant motion. Those of us that are in this generation, we can agree that most of our time is spent in front of a computer, television, tablet, cell phone, something that's distracting us. And the constant movement keeps our minds and bodies active, but it also keeps us from focusing our souls on the truth of God's Word. Many of us are so caught up in this seemingly unending activity that we neglect the time to appreciate the calm, comforting, and restorative nature of God. Remember Psalm 23, verses 2 through 3. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores.
The second part of the spiritual practice is let God be in charge. Everyone struggles with control issues. If God is as big as God is and cares about our lives, then I got to believe that somehow we got to be able to let go and God be in charge of things. First-hand faith throws up our hands and allows ourselves to be taken by the angels and totally rely on God to open up our hands in life and say, I have to give this one to you. All the pressures, all the anxiety that I've been struggling over this, I just have to be able to give this one to you. Lord, guide me. Faith in every generation is a lot like a trapeze artist. You have two swinging on the swings. Eventually, the one has got to let go of the one swing to be able to catch on to the other one who is swinging. Faith is like that, to be able to let go and then to grab on to this faith that God gives.
For every generation, three important things to remember. The first thing is stay in conversation with God. 1 Thessalonians 5:17 says that we are to pray without ceasing. God loves to hear your voice, so you should give Him a chance to hear more often. The second thing is embrace the mystery of life. Life is a journey of discovery. Discovering more about yourself, about other people, about the world we live in, and even about worlds that we can only dream of being. But, most of all, life is about discovering more about the one who created you. He gave you life so that you could enjoy the ability to marvel in awestruck wonder at who He is. The third thing is have faith in God. When all else passes away, God is with you. It's important for us to remember to be ourselves with God. God doesn't look for a phony version of you. He made you the way you are for a reason, because He knows you and He loves you for who you are. The reason we bring people to church is so that they can get to know Him too. But we have to give everyone their chance to meet Him. Relationships are only formed one way, person to person. They can't be forced. And this is why people want to experience God.
So finally, God designed us to be in community. There's a purpose that we meet each Sunday. The church may be imperfect, it may be messy at times, but this is still the vehicle that God has used to be able to share the message in the world. God designed us to be in community. We are not born to be a second-hander to carry somebody else's faith. We are born with a faith that is given us that is our own. First-hand faith that is vibrant and fulfilling.
The days of your youth are often the days when you face the greatest temptations. And the temptations to fall into immorality or to stray from the church are all too common in this day and age. And lacking a group of people your own age to keep you on a firm foundation will allow you to fall into those temptations very easily. But having that group of spiritual brothers and sisters around you to reinforce your desire for God in your own life is critical. And it's this first-hand faith that can keep this generation passionate about being the change we want to see in the world and being that change by serving others. A generation with this kind of faith will be characterized by a drive to please God that will not be compromised regardless of what may come again.
So never forget to be a second-hander, but you're meant to be a first-hander. This faith that is owned by you, it's authentic, it's vibrant. It's a time that we open our doors to those who are in their 20s and to be able to provide a safe place where all of us can connect life and faith. That's what our motto is. New Creation Lutheran Church, connecting life and faith.
Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul, worship His holy